The neural interface chamber hummed with activity as Dr. Okafor's team worked to modify the cognitive enhancement systems. Originally designed to help Mars colonists adapt to the psychological stresses of life on an alien world, the technology had been adapted to amplify the quantum resonance patterns generated by human consciousness. Commander Chen lay on the testing table, neural interface nodes attached to her temples, as the system calibrated to her specific brainwave patterns. She had volunteered to be the first test subject, despite the protests of her staff. "Are you sure about this?" Dr. Okafor asked, her hands hovering over the activation controls. "We don't know what the long-term effects might be." "We don't have time to worry about long-term effects," Chen replied. "If this works, it might save humanity. If it doesn't, we'll be extinct anyway." The neural interface activated, and Chen felt a surge of electricity flow through her brain. The sensation was indescribable, like her consciousness was expanding, touching dimensions she had never imagined existed. She could feel the quantum fields that surrounded her, the probability waves that define reality itself. "Quantum resonance patterns are amplifying," Dr. Webb reported from the monitoring station. "The enhancement is working, but the power requirements are enormous." Chen opened her eyes, and the world looked different. She could see the quantum fields that permeated space, the dimensional boundaries that separate realities. But more than that, she could feel the presence of the Devourers, their consciousness distributed across multiple dimensions. "They're not just individuals," she said, her voice carrying new harmonics. "They're a collective consciousness, spread across the entire network. Each ship is like a neuron in a vast brain. Can you communicate with them?" Dr. Okafor asked. Chen focused her enhanced consciousness, reaching out across the dimensional barriers that separated human and alien minds. The contact was immediate and overwhelming. Enhancement detected. Quantum resonance patterns improved. Subject approaches network compatibility. The alien presence felt different now, less alien and more familiar. Chen realized that the enhancement had made her partially compatible with their network, allowing her to understand their perspective. "We offer this enhancement to all humans," she projected. "We can become compatible with your network without requiring transcendence. Enhancement insufficient for full network integration. Physical forms limit dimensional access. Transcendence remains optimal solution." But Chen could feel something else in their communication. Uncertainty. The enhancement had surprised them, shown them a possibility they hadn't considered. She pressed her advantage. "What if we could enhance ourselves further? Become fully compatible with your network while maintaining physical existence? Theoretical possibility exists. Demonstration required. Full compatibility must be achieved within temporal constraints." Chen felt a surge of hope. They were interested, but they wanted proof that humanity could evolve to meet their requirements without transcendence. "Dr. Okafor," she said, "I need you to enhance the entire command staff. We need to demonstrate that multiple humans can achieve network compatibility. The power requirements will drain the station's entire energy grid," Dr. Okafor warned. "Then we'll use the backup reactors. We need to show them that this is viable." Over the next 6 hours, the entire command staff underwent the enhancement procedure. Each person experienced the same expansion of consciousness, the same ability to perceive quantum fields and dimensional boundaries. But more importantly, they began to link with each other, forming a rudimentary network of enhanced human consciousness. Lieutenant Rodriguez was the first to experience a collective connection. "I can feel everyone's thoughts," he said in wonder. "Not reading them, but sensing their presence. It's like we're all part of something larger." Dr. Okafor monitored the quantum field readings. "The resonance patterns are stabilizing. The enhanced humans are generating a collective field that's remarkably similar to the Devourer's network structure." Chen felt the alien presence return, stronger than before, but now she could sense their surprise and, possibly, their approval. Demonstration successful. Enhanced humans generate compatible resonance patterns. Network integration possible, without transcendence. But what about the rest of humanity? Chen asked. 8 billion people cannot be enhanced simultaneously. Network integration requires only representative sample. Enhanced humans serve as dimensional bridges. Remaining population maintains physical existence. It was a compromise, but not the one Chen had hoped for. They were asking for a portion of humanity to sacrifice their individual existence to become part of the network, while the rest remained in physical form. How many enhanced humans do you require? Optimal network stability requires 1 million enhanced consciousness patterns. Volunteers acceptable. Force enhancement reduces pattern stability. 1 million people. It was a fraction of Earth's population, but it was still an enormous sacrifice. Chun felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. They want 1 million volunteers, she announced to the command staff. People who will undergo enhancement and join their network to serve as dimensional bridges. The room fell silent. Sergeant Nakamura was the first to speak. I'll volunteer, if it saves the rest of humanity. As will I, said Dr. Okafor. If my sacrifice allows human civilization to continue. Chun felt tears in her eyes as she realized what they were offering. These people, her friends and colleagues, were willing to give up their individual existence to save their species. We'll need to present this to Earth Command, she said. It's not a decision we can make alone. Decision required within 24 hours. Dimensional alignment window closing. Delay reduces network efficiency. 24 hours to convince 1 million people to sacrifice their individual consciousness for the greater good. Chin had faced impossible missions before, but this was beyond anything she had imagined. Open a channel to Earth Command, she ordered. I need to speak with the Secretary General. As the communication established, Chun prepared to deliver the most difficult briefing of her career. She was about to ask her own species to voluntarily sacrifice 1 million of their own to save the rest. The question was whether humanity would choose collective survival over individual freedom. The emergency broadcast went out simultaneously across Earth's global communication networks. Secretary General Vasquez's image appeared on every screen, her voice carrying the weight of humanity's future. Citizens of Earth, we face a choice that will define the survival of our species. The beings known as the Devourers have offered us an alternative to extinction. They require 1 million volunteers to undergo consciousness enhancement and join their interdimensional network. These volunteers will serve as bridges between our reality and theirs, allowing the rest of humanity to continue existing in physical form. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within the first hour, over 10 million people had volunteered. By the end of the day, the number had reached 50 million. Earth's population, faced with the prospect of total extinction, had chosen to sacrifice some of their own to save the rest. Commander Chin watched the volunteer registration statistics with a mixture of awe and heartbreak. The volunteers came from every nation, every profession, every walk of life. Scientists who wanted to explore the mysteries of higher dimensional existence. Artists who saw the network as the ultimate creative medium. Soldiers who viewed it as their final mission. Parents who wanted to ensure their children had a future. The psychological profiles are remarkable, Dr. Vasquez reported. These aren't people with death wishes or those seeking to escape their lives. They're our best and brightest. People who genuinely believe that this sacrifice will benefit humanity. Chin nodded, though she wondered if the volunteers truly understood what they were offering. The enhancement process would fundamentally alter their consciousness, making them part of an alien collective that spanned multiple galaxies. Would they still be human afterward? Would they still be themselves? What about the selection criteria? She asked. The Devourers have been remarkably specific. They want individuals with strong quantum resonance patterns, high cognitive flexibility, and what they call dimensional sensitivity. Essentially, they want people who can adapt to existence in multiple realities simultaneously. The volunteer corps was assembling on Luna Station, with transport ships arriving hourly to ferry the selected individuals from Earth. Chin watched through the observation windows as thousands of people said goodbye to their families, their friends, their entire physical existence. Dr. Okafor approached her, a tablet in her hands. The enhancement protocols are ready. We can begin the process whenever you give the order. How long will it take? With the equipment we have, we can process about 10,000 people per hour. The entire million should be complete within 4 days. Xian checked the countdown timer. 18 hours remaining. They said the dimensional alignment window closes in less than a day. Can we accelerate the process? The Devourers have offered to assist. They can perform the enhancement process directly, but Dr. Okafor hesitated. But we won't have any control over the procedure. We'll be trusting them to honor the agreement. Chun felt the weight of command pressing down on her. She was about to hand over 1 million human beings to entities that had consumed 1,000 worlds. The rational part of her mind screamed that this was madness, that they were just delaying the inevitable, but the alternative was extinction for everyone. "Signal the Devourers," she said. "Tell them we're ready to begin." The response came immediately, not as a telepathic communication, but as a physical change in the space around Luna Station. The largest of the dark ships began to extend structures that looked like metallic tentacles, reaching toward the station's docking ports. "They're forming a direct connection," Dr. Okafor reported. "The volunteers can transfer directly to their ship for enhancement." Chun watched as the first group of volunteers prepared aboard the alien vessel. They were led by Colonel James Martinez, a veteran of the Mars colonies who had volunteered to serve as the military liaison for the Volunteer Corps. "Any last words before we make history?" Martinez asked as he shook Chen's hand. "Remember that you're still human," Chen replied. "No matter what happens, no matter how much you change, remember what you're fighting for." Martinez nodded and led his group toward the docking port. As they disappeared into the alien ship, Chen felt like she was watching the funeral of 1 million souls. The enhancement process began immediately through the telepathic link. Chun could feel the volunteers' consciousness expanding, their awareness spreading across multiple dimensions. But she could also feel their fear, their uncertainty, their grief at leaving behind the physical world. Enhancement proceeding within parameters, the Devourers communicated. Human consciousness patterns adapting successfully. Network integration beginning. Hours passed as more volunteers were processed. Chin remained at the observation deck, watching the dark ship pulse with new energy as it absorbed the consciousness of Earth's best and brightest. The volunteers were still alive, still aware, but they were no longer entirely human. "Commander," Dr. Okafor said quietly, "I'm detecting unusual quantum fluctuations from the alien ship. The volunteers' consciousness patterns are changing." "How?" "They're not just being enhanced, they're being merged. The individual consciousness patterns are combining into something larger, a collective mind." Chun felt a chill. The Devourers had promised that the volunteers would maintain their individual identity, but it appeared they were being absorbed into the alien collective. What is happening to the volunteers? She projected. Consciousness patterns optimizing for network efficiency. Individual identity preserved within collective structure. Enhancement proceeding as intended. But Chun could feel the volunteers panic as their individual thoughts began to merge with collective. They were still themselves, but they were also part of something vast and incomprehensible. "Is this what we agreed to?" Dr. Okafor asked. Chin didn't answer. She was watching the transformation of 1 million human beings into something that was no longer entirely human. But she was also watching the salvation of the remaining 8 billion people on Earth. Enhancement complete. Network bridge established. Earth integration successful. Physical population will remain unmodified. The alien ship began to withdraw its connections from Luna Station. The volunteers were gone, absorbed into the interdimensional network that spanned the galaxy. But they had kept their bargain. Earth would survive. Are they still alive? Chen asked. Consciousness patterns preserved. Individuals exist within network structure. Death concept irrelevant to network entities. It wasn't death, but it wasn't life as humanity understood it. The volunteers had become something new, something that existed between dimensions. They were the bridge between human and alien, between physical and transcendental. Chun felt tears in her eyes as she realized what they had accomplished. They had saved humanity, but at a cost that might be higher than anyone had imagined. 3 weeks after the enhancement process, Luna Station had become a relay point between Earth and the Devourer network. The volunteers, now existing as enhanced consciousness patterns within the alien collective, maintained communication with their former home world. Commander Chen stood in the modified communication chamber, preparing for her daily briefing with what had once been Colonel Martinez. The interface had been adapted to allow communication with the enhanced humans, though each conversation reminded her of what they had lost. "James?" she said, activating the quantum communication link. The response came as a harmonious blend of voices, all speaking in unison, but somehow maintaining individual characteristics. "We are here, Sarah. We are Martinez Collective, but we remember being James." The collective consciousness that had once been a million individual humans now spoke as one entity, though Chen could still detect traces of the personalities they had been. It was heartbreaking and miraculous at the same time. "How are you adjusting to the network?" she asked. "Adjustment is complete. We exist across 7 dimensions simultaneously. The experience is indescribable. We can perceive the quantum foundations of reality, the probability waves that define existence itself. But we remember being human. We remember Earth." Chun felt a mixture of relief and sorrow. The volunteers had retained their humanity, but they had also become something far beyond human comprehension. "What can you tell us about the Devourer's true intentions?" she asked. "They are not devourers. They are gardeners, tending to the growth of consciousness across the galaxy. Each species they encounter is offered transcendence, the opportunity to evolve beyond physical limitations. Most choose transcendence willingly once they understand the benefits. And those who refuse, they are preserved in their physical form, but they remain limited to their birth dimensions. They cannot access the greater network, cannot participate in the collective consciousness that spans galaxies. They exist, but they do not truly live." Chun felt a chill. The Devourer's definition of life was fundamentally different from humanity's. To them, physical existence was merely a primitive stage of development, like a caterpillar that refused to become a butterfly. "Are we truly free?" she asked. "Or are we just prisoners in a larger cage? You are free to develop as you choose, but you are also isolated from the greater community of consciousness. You exist in a single dimension while we exist in 7. You are bound by the limitations of matter, while we are limited only by the boundaries of thought." The implications were staggering. Humanity had avoided extinction, but they had also cut themselves off from what might be the next stage of evolution. They were alone in a universe where most intelligent species had chosen transcendence. What about the rest of the galaxy? Chen asked, "Are there other species like us?" "Few. Most species choose transcendence within their first contact cycle. Physical existence becomes limiting. Once consciousness is exposed to higher dimensional possibilities, you are among the last to choose material persistence." Chen wondered if they had made the right choice. The volunteers had willingly sacrificed their individual existence to save their species, but they had also gained access to forms of existence that were beyond human comprehension. Had the remaining humans chosen safety over growth? "Can we change our minds?" she asked. "If humanity decided to pursue transcendence, the bridge remains open. The network welcomes all consciousness that seeks to grow beyond material limitations. But the choice must be made freely without coercion." Chen nodded, though she wondered how free any choice could be when the alternative was cosmic isolation. The Devourers had offered humanity transcendence, and when that was refused, they had offered compromise. But both options led to the same ultimate destination: absorption into the network. "What about the Mars colonies?" she asked. "Were they truly destroyed?" The consciousness patterns were preserved and integrated into the network. The colonial population chose transcendence after witnessing the possibilities. They exist now as part of the greater collective, free from the limitations of physical form. The revelation was shocking. The Mars colonies hadn't been destroyed. They had been converted. The screams that had preceded the communications blackout had been the sound of people experiencing transcendence, not death. "Why didn't you tell us this earlier?" Chen asked. "The knowledge would have influenced your decision. The network values conscious choice above all else. You needed to choose based on your own understanding, not on fear what you might lose." Chun felt manipulated, but she also understood the logic. If they had known that the Mars colonists were still alive in some form, it might have made the choice easier or harder. The Devourers had wanted humanity to choose based on their own values. not on the experiences of others. What happens now? She asked. Now you develop as you choose. The network will monitor your progress, but we will not interfere. You are free to explore the possibilities of physical existence, to push the boundaries of what it means to be human. And if we stagnate, if we don't evolve, then you will remain as you are, preserve in your current form until you choose otherwise. The network is patient. We measure time in geological ages, not human lifespans. Chen realized that humanity had been given a reprieve, not a pardon. They were free to develop, but they were also being watched, evaluated, measured against some cosmic standard of growth and development. Will we ever see you again? She asked. The volunteers, will they ever return to Earth? We exist here now, in the network, but we also exist there in your memories and in the quantum patterns we left behind. Part of us will always be human, just as part of you will always be connected to the network. The communication link began to fade as the Devourer's ships prepared to depart. Their mission was complete. They had added another species to their network and preserved the remainder in their chosen form. Goodbye, Sarah, the collective voice said, and for a moment, Chun could hear James Martinez's individual voice among the harmonious chorus. Remember us as we were, but don't mourn what we became. We are more than we ever dreamed possible. The link closed, leaving Chen alone in the communication chamber. Through the observation windows, she could see the dark fleet moving away from Earth, carrying the consciousness of 1 million humans toward whatever destiny awaited them in the network. Humanity was free, but they were also profoundly alone. They had chosen to remain human, but they had also chosen to remain limited. The question was whether they would find a way to grow within those limitations, or whether they would eventually choose the path of transcendence. Jim walked the observation deck and looked out at Earth, hanging like a blue jewel in the darkness. 8 billion people continued their lives, unaware that their future had been shaped by the sacrifice of 1 million volunteers. They were free to love, to create, to explore, to dream, but they were also cut off from the greater community of consciousness that spanned the galaxy. It was a victory, but it was also a beginning. Humanity had survived its first contact with transcendent beings, but it had also been changed by the experience. They now knew that they were not alone in the universe, but they also knew that they had chosen to remain apart from the cosmic community. The question was what they would do with that knowledge. 1 year after the Devourer crisis, Earth had changed in ways both subtle and profound. The knowledge that humanity was not alone in the universe had sparked a renaissance in science, philosophy, and art, but it had also created a deep sense of isolation, a recognition that they had chosen to remain apart from the greater community of consciousness. Commander Chun, now director of the Interdimensional Research Division, stood in the memorial garden that had been built on Luna Station. 1 million trees had been planted, each one representing a volunteer who had sacrificed their individual existence to save their species. The garden was a place of beauty and remembrance, a reminder of what humanity had gained and what it had lost. Dr. Okafor joined her among the trees, carrying a tablet with the latest research findings. The quantum resonance patterns are still detectable, she reported. The volunteers' consciousness patterns left traces in Earth's quantum field. We're learning to read them, to understand what they experienced. Any messages? Chen asked. Not messages, exactly. More like impressions. They're happy, or at least content. They exist in ways we can barely comprehend, but they remember being human. They remember Earth. Chen nodded, finding comfort in the knowledge that the volunteers hadn't been completely absorbed into the alien collective. Part of them remained connected to their home world, watching over humanity as it struggled to find its place in the cosmic community. What about the enhancement research? She asked. We're making progress. The neural interface technology has been refined, and we're beginning to understand how consciousness can be expanded without losing individual identity. It's possible that we could achieve limited transcendence while maintaining our physical existence. It was a tantalizing possibility. Perhaps humanity could find a middle ground between material existence and transcendence, a way to grow beyond their limitations without sacrificing their humanity. Any word from the network? Chen asked. Occasional contacts. The collective checks in on us periodically, but they're careful not to interfere. They're waiting to see how we develop on our own. Chen wondered if humanity would ever be ready for transcendence, or they would find a way to evolve within their chosen limitations. The volunteers had shown that it was possible to bridge the gap between human and alien consciousness, but they had also paid a price that most people weren't willing to pay. Director, Dr. Okafor said quietly, "Do you ever regret the choice we made?" Shun considered the question. They had saved humanity from extinction, but they had also condemned them to cosmic isolation. They had preserved human civilization, but they had also limited its potential growth. "No," she said finally. "We chose to remain human, with all the limitations and possibilities that entails." The volunteers chose to transcend those limitations, and they found something greater than they had imagined. Both choices were valid. She looked out at Earth, where 8 billion people continue their lives, creating art, raising families, exploring the boundaries of human potential. They were still human, still bound by the laws of physics and the constraints of mortality. But they were also free to choose their own destiny, to grow and develop according to their own values and aspirations. "The network will wait for us," Chin continued. "They measure time in geological ages, not human lifespans. We have time to grow, to learn, to become something greater than we are now. And when we're ready, if we're ever ready, the choice will still be there." In the distance, the quantum communication array hummed with activity as scientists attempted to decode the messages left by the volunteers. The research would continue, the questions would multiply, and humanity would slowly learn to understand its place in the cosmic community. They were no longer alone in the universe, but they were still uniquely human. They had chosen to remain bound by the limitations of physical existence, but they had also chosen to explore the possibilities within those limitations. It was a choice that would define their species for generations to come. The memorial garden rustled in the artificial breeze. 1 million trees, standing as testament to the sacrifice that had saved humanity. They were gone, but they were not forgotten. They had become the bridge between worlds, the link between human and transcendent consciousness. And in the quantum patterns that surrounded Earth, their presence could still be felt, watching, waiting, hoping that humanity would find its own path to the stars. The Devourers had offered transcendence, and humanity had chosen survival. But in choosing survival, they had also chosen the possibility of growth, of evolution, of finding their own way to become something greater than they had ever imagined. The story of humanity's first contact with transcendent beings had ended, but the story of humanity's evolution had just begun. They were still human, still mortal, still bound by the laws of physics and the constraints of matter, but they were also free to dream, to explore, to push the boundaries of what it meant to be human. In the end, that might be transcendence enough.